All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Jazziz Daily Brunch. I am your host, Brian Zimmerman, digital content editor for Jazziz Magazine, and it is my absolute honor to welcome you to this episode, Jazziz Daily Brunch. Man, the only calorie-free jazz brunch in the world. Although I was thinking, I've always got my cup of coffee with me. I should probably start bringing some snacks, make it like a real jazz brunch. Have the lawn chair, the bottle of wine, cheese plate, little prosciutto. We'll get there one day, folks. Anyway, hey, it is Wednesday, April 22nd. It is Earth Day. So remember to be kind to the planet today. It is also Charles Mingus's birthday. So maybe spin a little Mingus today. I always love Mingus. It's a great place to start for those uninitiated to Mingus. It's also Paul Chambers' birthday, bassist in the great Miles Davis First Great Quintet. So there's something about April 22nd and bassists. And as a matter of fact, our guest today is a bassist, and not just any bassist. It is Mark Egan, formerly of the Pat Metheny Group and a founding member of the band Elements. He's played with almost everybody. He has had a wonderful solo career. Is currently playing with the Gil Evans Orchestra. He is chatting with us today about those career highlights. It is going to be a great conversation. We're going to get to it in a minute. But first, I just want to thank some of this episode's sponsors. They include Concord Jazz. They have a new release coming out April 24th called Ella 100, live at the Apollo. It's a live album. It was recorded at the Apollo, of course, in Harlem, New York, in front of an ecstatic audience. And it was produced by 8-time Grammy and Emmy Award recipient and former Ella Fitzgerald drummer Greg Field. It features dynamic and loving tributes from a parade of amazing performers, including Andra Day, Lettucey, Liz Wright, Cassandra Wilson, Monica Mancini, and so many more. And it is hosted by Grammy Award winner Patty Austin and multi-Tony Award nominated actor and singer David Alan Grier. Again, this album will be out April 24th, so that's right around the corner. That's this Friday. And we're going to have Greg on the show April 27th to talk about it. For more information, check out concord.com. That's where you can learn all about it. This episode is also brought to you by Blue Sound, an award-winning wireless high-res sound system that lets you play music in any and every room throughout your home. All you do is you choose the music, perhaps some by the Pat Metheny Group. I don't know. I'm just throwing an example out there. On your favorite streaming service, connected to the free Blue OS app on your smartphone, tablet, or desktop computer, and that's it. Getting the kind of crisp and detailed sound that only an audiophile grade system can deliver has never been easier. Some products that the Jazziz viewers might enjoy: the Node 2i wireless multi-room high-res streamer and the Pulse Soundbar 2i wireless streaming multi-room sound system. This will make your music sound great. I'm telling you. You can learn more at bluesound.com or by checking out the Blue Sound Buyer's Guide that we have on our website, jazziz.com. Anyhow, without further ado, what do you say we welcome today's very, very special guest to the Jazz Brunch? He has his coffee ready. He's ready to talk about his incredible career as a bassist with some of the top groups in fusion. Please welcome Mark Egan.
Hello, Brian. Hello, everyone.
Hey, man. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. My first question is always just, how you doing, man? I'm checking in. I want to see how things are going. These are strange times. How you holding up?
I'm holding up well. They are strange times. I know everyone in the world is going through this. And, my heart goes out to everybody that have lost people or friends. It's a time to reflect, and it's very strange times. We've never seen anything like this. And I hope everyone is safe, healthy. I'm thankful that we're safe and healthy, and I wish it to everyone. As do we.
You've been playing a lot of music while you've been kind of hunkered down, listening to a lot of music. What's getting you through?
Playing a lot of music and a lot of listening, going back. And I've sort of gotten into a good routine of practice, different aspects of my playing where I find weaknesses, and also studying piano, some classical guitar and my bass, and working on not so much composition as I keep a notebook of ideas that I do. A lot of times in my daily practice schedule, I'll just play free. and I'll come up with ideas while I'm practicing. And I keep this notebook, and it's a music staff of notebook. And later on, those ideas become songs. So
nice.
I'm pretty
So maybe
diligent about
an
that.
album in the works. Hard to believe you have any weaknesses, by the way, Mark.
Oh,
not from what I've heard.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, you know, the player knows what their strengths and weaknesses, you know, if you're aware. And there's a lot of things. So it's actually, you know, and I saw John McLaughlin speak about this. This is precious time, you know, for everyone, not only in music, but to work on to read, to learn new things. There's so much available online, and you know, whatever you want to do, you have the time now. So there's no
exactly right. No. Now's the time.
Now is the time. And well, I got to say, I'm so honored to be on the day of Charles Mingus, the great bassist, and Paul Chambers, two of my heroes and two of the founding fathers of jazz acoustic bass. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's kind of a cool place to start. I was doing my research for the show. I always like to check in what happened on this day. And yeah, Mingus was born today. Paul Chambers was born today. You mentioned those were influences. Growing up, who else were you listening to? Because I know in addition to playing bass, you were also a trumpet player, and a good one.
I was a trumpet player. And ever since I was little, fourth grade, I started to play trumpet all through elementary school, playing in bands, school bands, you know, the type of groups where at that time, we had an assembly every week, and I was in the pit band at the assembly that played. So it was always fun. And we always got to get out of class early to go rehearse and do these events. So from that to other bands in high school, I started playing in the Brockton Youth Stage Band, which was a local jazz band. And we actually played at Expo 67.
Nice.
At the band, we went up there and did that, which was a lot of fun. And we played locally a lot. And so I played all through high school. I also played in rhythm and blues bands in the trumpet sections. And around when I was about 16, I bought a bass because I was interested in bass, electric bass, which was kind of unusual because, you know, being a trumpet player, you're up in the higher end of
I was just going to say,
the spectrum of sound. But I was for some reason, my ears tuned into bass, especially on the radio during that time. You had all the great music that was on AM radio, like Cream and Hendrix, the Beatles, on and on and on. So, but my ear tuned into the bass. So I bought a bass just to play it. And so that's how I started to play. But my focus definitely was trumpet. And I went to study at the University of Miami as a trumpet player in the Applied Studio Music and Jazz program with Jerry Coker.
That's right. Yep. That's right. And it was an incredible time for being at the University of Miami. And we'll get to it in a second. But I just want to relate. I, too, am a trumpet player. That is my first instrument.
Yay.
The second one that I also picked up was the bass. I don't know. There must be something about you want to balance the frequencies, you know, a difference in roles. Trumpet players out front a lot of time, you know, screaming high, and the bass, you know, it's kind of supportive. So that's really interesting. Yeah. That we
played bass and trumpet. You know, other players, I know Mike Richmond was a trumpet player, and Steve Swallow, his original instrument was trumpet.
We may be onto something here, Mark. Yeah.
You know, maybe the correlation is that usually it's single note. Not nowadays, everybody plays, you know, all over the instrument, but it's single note playing, but yeah, it's a different place.
Totally. And I got to admit, as a trumpet player, watching a bass player on stage, you know, totally ignorant of the bass, I used to say, oh, the guy just has to play, you know, he's walking a bass line. It's 4 notes per measure. He's plucking one note. How hard can this be? Until I started playing.
Right.
And the physicality of that instrument. Oh, watching a bass player. It's like a full body workout for every performance.
Yes.
And crafting a bass line, you know, out of something like 4 notes, like you would with a walking bass line. It's like telling somebody to sketch, you know, a landscape with just 4 lines. You know, it's remarkably hard. It's remarkably hard. So don't forget, people, next time you're watching the bass player.
Especially the deeper you get into it, the subtlety of it, and the depth of it, because it's the foundation, you know, it's in the true functional sense of supporting a group. And you can't go deep enough as far as laying down a groove and harmonically and really coming up with great melodies and lines that are supportive, not only supportive, but also as a lead instrument as well. So, but you know, it's fascinating.
Totally. And after this, we'll have to start our support group for, you know, ex-trumpet players who became bassists. But
and Brian, early on, I wanted to say I took lessons from a guitar player when I was about 16. His name is Mike Lally, and he was in the same building that I studied with. My trumpet teacher was Dick Johnson in Brockton. So I took lessons with him, and he immediately got me on the neck. It was electric bass. I was playing 4 fingers for each fret, like guitar, which bass guitar is from the guitar family.
It's a different animal, yeah.
And he got me into playing chords and scales, which I already knew on trumpet because I was already pretty advanced in from probably 15, 16 on. I was playing professionally then when I was 15. So he brought me right into the right place. So I had a good teacher at the beginning. So it was very helpful for me.
Nice. And you mentioned you took it to University of Miami to study. Now, the University of Miami at this time, we're talking early mid-70s, right, was like a Parisian left bank with the talent down there. This group, I want you, for people who don't know, I want you to kind of take us back to happier times, University of Miami, 1970s. Who was there? Who were you hanging with? What was going on?
Yes, they were happy times.
Yes, they were.
And, I remember my father, Gordon, telling me, enjoy this time because after you get out of this, you're going to be working, and I realized when I got there, I had to work
yeah, exactly.
to study because, from a time point of view, timestamp, it was 1969.
Okay.
So people who were around then know what was happening with the music revolution, just the revolution of the whole generation at that time. And my first friend that I met there was a trumpet player named Kim Baldwin. And we actually were trying to get out of the rain. This is the very first day I was there. We bumped into each other and we became, lifelong friends. But other people who were at the university at the same time were Danny Gottlieb, Clifford Carter, great keyboard player. Pat Metheny came a few years later. Hiram Bullock, guitar player, great guitar player. Steve Morse and the Dixie Dregs all were one of the university rock bands, ensembles.
Wow.
Mark Colby, great saxophone player, was there. There's so many people.
It was just such an incubator of this style that would become, fusion, but kind of the next generation of fusion after the Miles Bitches Brew funk thing. This was really the group, Pat Metheny and you and Hiram Bullock and a lot of the guys down there, Jaco, because he was down there too. Was he a student at University of Miami? He was just on the South Florida scene.
Jaco was in the South Florida scene. He he lived in Fort Lauderdale area up in around there, but he did come down and teach at the university. And I was able to study with him as sort of adjunct faculty there. Yeah.
I mean, this was like really the group that would take fusion, and where beforehand it may have sounded like a heterogeneous mixture of elements, they would turn it into something brand new. And that's really where they were spearheading it, man.
Yes. And I think the fountainhead of that whole jazz program was Jerry Coker, who is, for people who don't know Jerry Coker, he's one of the early founders of teaching jazz to people.
Yeah, early jazz educator.
Himself and David Baker. And he came to University of Miami and started that program, and that's what attracted everyone. So it wasn't like they were just there by chance. He brought them there, and I had heard about him through my trumpet teacher, and thought it was a good place to go. And so that's why they were there. And there are also other great players and teachers there. Whit Seidner was actually a grad student when I went there, and I took private lessons with him. He's a saxophone player. Again, another great teacher who brought me right into the heart of it on trumpet.
Yeah.
How to construct lines, improvising, how to get a great sound, good time. And also there was a great teacher who was also on the faculty, Jerry Green, saxophone player, fine saxophone player, amazing saxophone player.
Wow.
So yeah.
No, go ahead.
Oh, my screensaver just went off. Okay, there we go.
There you go. I wanted to do some fact checking with you too. I'm glad I have you on the show today, because the rumor about Pat Metheny, being at the University of Miami during this time, was that he was a student there for like 2 weeks, and then they made him a professor. Is there any truth to that?
No.
Okay.
Not at all. But I'll tell you, I remember very vividly when Pat Metheny came to the university, and he came and played with the big band, and which I don't know if I was in that band at the time. I think the next year I was playing bass. And from the start, he sounded like he'd been a professional for 20 years. He had it. He was so strong. He was amazing. It's not true. He was there for at least a year. I don't remember if it was 2 years. He didn't become a professor there. He moved and went to Berkeley and became a teacher at Berkeley.
Okay.
On the suggestion of Gary Burton. And so he went up and taught it there. I think he completed 1 year or partially, but it wasn't 2 weeks because
that's hearsay.
We played together for a lot.
Okay.
But he was just a supernova. Just
that was my question: is did you get a sense that there was just something special about? How old was he at the time?
I think he was 18.
18.
I'm not exactly sure, but I think he was 18. I think he graduated high school and then he came there. But
cool.
He had already been, studied West Montgomery's playing and was full-fledged, stylistic, and had his thing. Great time. He was fully formed in a basic way.
Right.
So
you could tell that was the Pat Metheny that would become Pat Metheny.
You could tell he was extremely talented, and he was a professional. That's what you just felt.
Cool. Now, after you had switched to bass in college, you took lessons with Jaco. Studied with Jaco. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I'll back up a little, because before I did that, I studied with a bass player who was in Miami, a professional named Don Kaufman.
Okay.
And he was a great teacher. He was another very important teacher to me because he taught me, he extended what I had already learned from Mike Lally in high school on the bass. And I really started to get into different relationships on the bass of where intervals laid, where just how to play, all the different aspects of playing, not only jazz, but just the bass as an instrument. So I studied with him not only on electric, but on upright bass. So I'd been studying with him. At the same time, I switched my major from trumpet to bass in the middle after my second year at the university, which was a big deal.
Yeah.
Because I was playing trumpet in the jazz band and the first jazz band, and I was playing solo trumpet, second trumpet, but I had been playing a lot of bass, and I could tell you about the evolution of how that became to the point where I would want to be more of a bass player as a major.
Sure, because I switched from journalism to English, which is not as big of a leap, as switching instruments at the University of Miami. Yeah.
So, I had, as I said, I brought my instrument, my bass, down to the university with me, just to have it with me to play, because I like to play. And I had it at this house I was sharing with a friend of mine. And one day, this saxophone player named Jet Nero, I know, interesting name.
It's a great name.
Yeah, he wasn't around the university scene, but he was a player that was playing in Miami at all the clubs and always had a steady band. He always had a steady gig. One of those people who just always had a gig, was always playing with the band. And he came to our house and saw that there was a bass there and asked my friend Randy, who plays bass, and he said, "Oh, Mark, that's Mark's bass." So little did I know, he called me to play a gig that night, or next night or something. He said, "Mark, could you play a gig?" And I have a lot of nerve. I said, "Yeah, I'll play," and because on trumpet I could definitely play it as a soloist, whatever. So he said, "Okay, I got this gig at the something lounge next week, tomorrow, whatever." And I said, "Well, what tunes are you going to be playing?" And he gave me a list of the tunes, and I learned them all on bass because I knew them all on trumpet.
Okay.
As I said, so I had them, but at that time I was more playing one finger bass. I was very, very basic, but I had a good feel. So I practiced that day, and
half the battle,
and I went that night and I played, and it worked out. It was this funky little gig. It was a little funky bar along the Dixie Highway, but he asked me at the end of the day, he says, "Do you want to play steady with the band?" And I felt like an imposter, but I said, "Sure." I was going to school full time at the time. So I ended up playing with his band, and we played jazz standards, and
nice, man.
Not many originals, but it was like more of a jazz cover band.
But you're getting the fundamentals, under your fingers in the muscle memory. Yeah.
By the seat of my pants. And so
faked it till you made it. Yeah.
I faked it till I made it, and I kept studying and working on it. And then I was studying with Don Kaufman at the time. But I was really still a professional trumpet player, but word got out and there was a lot of work. There were a lot of clubs. There was always something happening in Miami, which was a great thing. So and Fort Lauderdale area where you guys are. So one thing led to another, and I was becoming more busy on bass than I was on trumpet. And I felt like I had to make a decision because I felt I couldn't do both. And I wanted to really focus on one thing. I was getting spread too thinly. So I made the decision to change my major to bass. And I remember calling my parents and saying, I'm switching my major. And they always supported me, incredibly. They were such supportive parents for all of our siblings, and they said, well, if you really feel this, then you got to go for it, and I said, I have to do this. I
Cool.
know what I'm doing. I'm going to do this. So that for me was a turning point where I felt like I became self-realized in the sense of what I really wanted to do. And I really, really went deep on that. And I transferred all the knowledge that I had harmonically and melodically on trumpet over to the bass. And that was enough to work, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Totally.
Which I did. I just practiced all the time and played in different ensembles and played gigs at night. And so it was a great time. It was an opportunity to play with all these players at the university, from, Pat and Danny and Clifford and Hiram, people that I mentioned, and then study with great teachers. The great teacher Ronnie Miller was my composition teacher, who I later played in a small group with Mark Colby with. And Ron Miller is one of the leading compositional teachers, jazz composition in the world. So I couldn't have been more lucky to study with him. And I also took private lessons with Jerry Coker, took improv with Jerry Coker. So, around some very heavy people, heavy spirits.
It was a great time for jazz and for that scene.
Absolutely.
And, you mentioned the switch from trumpet to bass. I'm thinking, I can imagine calling your parents, telling them you're switching from like pre-med to jazz bass or something like that. They go, no. I think your history with the trumpet certainly kind of affected the way you think about the bass, because your bass playing is very melodic. You really get up into that upper register very nicely. You've got a horn-like quality to your bass playing. And when we talk about, novel ways to approach the bass, again, returning to Jaco, we've heard a lot of Jaco stories on this series because we had Flora Purim and Erto Morera on yesterday. And
nice.
We had Al Dimiola on. And,
nice.
We haven't spoken to a bass player yet, though, about just what Jaco did for bass playing and how he transformed the instrument. So you, who literally got to study, at his feet, I wonder if you could just unpack Jaco a little bit. First of all, from a musical perspective, what he did musically for the bass and how he radicalized that instrument. And then from a personal perspective, what he was like as a person.
Sure. And before I get into it, I want to say hello to Flora and Aerto, who you had on yesterday, because I played with them for several years and recorded with them. And just to hear their names just made me so happy,
It was great to see them again. They've had some troubles coming over to the States, but they assured us and everybody watching that they're going to be back soon. So check out that episode. And Mark, let me also remind people while we're in this little pause here, people watching online, and we see there are a bunch of you, feel free to drop us a line, say hey to Mark. You've seen we've already put some comments up on the screen. If you have a question for Mark, go ahead and write it in. We'll ask Mark on air and we'll get him to answer it. So Mark, go ahead, talking about Jaco.
Great. Well, I'll set it up a little bit by the way that I met Jaco, which I had been playing with Ira Sullivan, who, for people who don't know Ira, he's a multi-instrumentalist, trumpet player, flute player, saxophone, and an incredible musician. And he's one of the people that I also played with in his group in Miami. And also in that group was Steve Bagby, Tony Castellano, and Joe Diorio. So I was in some very heavy company. I was lucky that I was the worst person in the group because it made me really rise or else. Exactly. So I always seem to find myself in those situations, but I try to rise to the occasion whenever. And anyway, we had been playing with that band, but Ira also had another electric band with Jaco in it. And he would tell me they would play up in the Lauderdale area at a place called the Lion's Share and different places. That was a club. And that was with Bobby Economou and Alex Starkey. And they played a lot of original compositions. And Ira would keep saying, Mark, you got to hear this guy Jaco. And he brought in a few Jaco tunes. And so I started to hear about Jaco. And then at the same time, I played in a big band on bass. At the time I was playing electric, called the Baker's Dozen, which was a big band that was in Miami. It was led by Ira Sullivan and Vince Lawrence, which is also Vince Maggio. And it was all the players around Miami, Whit Seidner and Jerry Green, Kenny Falk, Steve Bagby, and Don Mast was the acoustic player. And they needed electric player to be in it, so they asked me to play, and I was honored to be in that, and we played with that band. So at the same time, Ira Sullivan was playing with Jaco in this other band, and he wanted to bring yet another electric player and keep me in the band, but to play Jaco's tunes for this big band. So we would rehearse at Miami-Dade University. So this is the first time I met Jaco. He brought Jaco to the rehearsal to play his charts. Domingo, I think, was the chart that he wrote for the big band, and it was one that he played with Wayne Cochran and the CC Riders, which Jaco was a member of that band.
Yeah.
So because there were 3 bass players for different parts, so we never played simultaneously.
Okay.
But while the acoustic player, Don Mast, was playing with the band, Jaco and I went to the back of the auditorium and we were hanging out. And so Jaco brought his reel-to-reel Sony 4-track machine or 2-track machine. It weighs 150 pounds. He brought that to the rehearsal and 2 sets of headphones. And he said, Jaco is just, I've always had great things to say about Jaco as far as being the nicest person and always very enthusiastic and supportive. But he goes, Mark, you got to check this out. Check this out. It was a tape of Wayne Cochran and the CC Riders playing the chart that we were going to play. And I hadn't heard Jaco play it. This is the first time I heard him. And I put it on and I said to myself, oh my God, this is innovative. I've never heard anything like this. No one's doing this. I'm listening to an innovator. That's what I thought. So I'm listening to it. And when you have headphones on, you talk louder because you can't hear yourself. So you're trying to hear yourself. So we were talking very loud, so loud that the leader of the band, Vince, said, hey, you guys, get out of here. We got kicked out of the auditorium. So Jaco grabbed this heavy machine and we walked out and we listened to more. But it was a funny story, but that's the first time I heard him. And at that time, I had been listening to and very inspired by Stanley Clarke. And on the electric bass side, and all the people in pop music on the bass side. I'd been listening to Jack Bruce and Noel Redding and Paul McCartney as far as electric. And on the other side, I'd been listening to, as we mentioned before, Charles Mingus and Paul Chambers. But I had never heard anything like Jaco. And I thought it sounded like John McLaughlin playing bass to me, because I was listening to Mahavishnu at the same time, and I was listening to very progressive music.
Right.
But the sound, the fretless, and the groove, and the facility, and just the whole elasticity of the groove and the way that he played it was so impressive. So that's when I first heard Jaco, and from then on, I was a huge fan, and went on to just follow him around Florida and go to listen to that group with Ira Sullivan at the Lion's Share, and there are recordings of that. And
oh wow!
And there's a good double CD set called Jaco: The Early Years, and it was produced by Bob Bobbings. He's another bass player. He's another bass player. When I was playing trumpet, my last trumpet gig was with Mel Torme. I played in the in the horn section. It was a good way to go out on trumpet.
Exactly, on a high note for sure.
Yeah, well, I was playing fourth trumpet, so.
But
still had to read the charts.
Right.
But there was another band called, I think it was Sassafras, and in that band was this drummer Bob Bobbing and the bass player, and the drummer was Alec. I forgot his last name. Bobby Conamo. So Bob Bobbing in the dressing room was saying to me, "You got to hear this bass player, Jaco. You know, he's amazing." And because I was digging Bob Bobbing's playing, and he had been studying with Jaco, and he had a lot of stuff that Jaco had taught him. I said, "Wow, you got to show me some stuff." He goes, "Oh man," and he sort of talked like Jaco. Jaco had the way of speaking, you know, man.
Hey man, yeah.
But he started to talk like Jaco. So I said, "Well, I got to meet this guy Jaco." So all these things were coming from different.
They were all converging around Jaco.
Different sources.
Yeah.
So, and I heard him play, and then gradually, but he released this record. Bob Bobbing did. He being such a fan of Jaco, recorded Jaco in all these bands, little impromptu recordings, and he put out this record, which is a double record, which I highly recommend. And for me, the point that I'm getting at about this is that record is really the Jaco that really influenced me. Not everything influenced me of Jaco's playing, but the early years, especially when it was very pure and there was a certain energy to it.
It felt so groundbreaking. Yeah,
it was so groundbreaking, and just the innocence of it. And you know, Jaco later, when he got his fame and went out there, I was later. I was, even though he played great, I was disappointed because he got into more of his showmanship towards the end, and I think that was it was hard for me to take because I knew that the true Jaco was just completely focused on the music. But you know, I have to say, if you close your eyes, even if Jaco's dancing around the stage, he never skipped a beat or lost anything. It was always
still
happening.
Jaco. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a tragic story what happened to him, and really one of the great geniuses of jazz bass and of jazz period. And what you said about him kind of bringing the bass out of the foundation while at the same time keeping it there, keeping it steady. It's just incredible what he did. I wanted to, this is fact check number 2 for you. You're like my human jazz snopes.com or something like that. Any truth to the rumor that Jaco used to pull the frets out of his bass with pliers and then coat it in goose fat? Or no, he would coat it in some kind of boat shellac or something?
Yes.
Okay. We got one. I got one.
He did take the frets out of his bass while he was on the road with Wayne Cochran and the CC Riders.
Okay.
Because I don't know exactly why he did it, but he did it. And when you take the frets out of an instrument, you know, those are the metal lines.
Yep.
It leaves a gap. So he filled it with a wood filler, and then he covered it with this. It's called Petit Polypoxy, and it's still available at boatyards. And I've used it before. I did the same thing on one of my 64 jazz bass.
Wow.
And I put the finish on with a paintbrush, and it was unplayable. So, which is another story that I'll get to, which led me to the great instrument maker, Michael Padula, because a friend of mine, Tim Landers, a great bass player, Tim Landers, I called him after I had botched the bass. I did it down in my parents' basement in the summer of 74, I think. And I called Tim. I said, "Tim, I have to go to a bass repairman." And he said, "Well, Mike Padula is really great." And so Mike did a spray on it, and it came out great.
Nice. I guarantee you were not the only young bass player who had tried to Jaco their bass and totally ruined it.
Yes.
Fact check number 3. Any truth to the this is the goose fat rumor that Jaco used to put goose fat or chicken grease or something so he could slide all over the bass?
No, I never saw him do that. I played his bass, and it didn't have any goose fat on it. It wasn't greasy. But a funny story. I used to use lemon oil on my upright bass neck.
Okay.
And then when I started playing electric, I used finger ease. It's called. It's a spray can that you put on. I like it because it makes it like that. But when I was playing upright in the big band with the University of Miami band, we also had another player. Ben Brown was playing upright with the band, and I remember I was playing electric with the band and Ben was playing acoustic. I remember I was playing, Ben was playing, and I had smelled this funky smell. Sorry. I won't bother to turn this off. It's going to be a little blackout once in a while there.
No worries. We can still hear you.
Yeah, okay. So we were at the rehearsal at the University of Miami in the jazz band room, FB 206. I wrote a song called FB 206
Yes, that's
with
right.
Danny Gottlieb.
Yeah.
And in FB 206, I looked around and I said, Ben, what's that smell? And he was using mayonnaise on his neck, on his fingerboard, but it wasn't refrigerated, you know.
Oh.
So it was a jar of mayonnaise.
Oh.
He left it out. So it was very funky. And, you know, so that reminded me of the grease fat on the bass. But anyway.
Anything you got to do. Hey, so, I mean, let's talk Danny Gottlieb. You know, obviously you were a founding member of, you were the original member of the Pat Metheny group, right? So Pat, who was, you know, a colleague at the University of Miami, had done some recording. He had the solo work for ECM with Jaco on it, you know, Bright Size Life and that kind of stuff. But you were on that first Pat Metheny group album, the self-titled debut, the White Album, as fans come to call it now. You know, I'm curious about how you rehooked up with Pat after all that time. And then importantly, and more importantly, the composition process for that album. I'm always curious as to how collaborative it was between, you know, the four of you, or how much of it was Pat doing his thing and then kind of entrusting you to come up with your own parts.
Mm-hmm. Good questions. And again, I'll lead it in with a little bit of how I reconnected with Pat.
Sure.
I moved to New York in 1976 with Phyllis Hyman, the great singer. In that group was Hiram Bullock and Clifford Carter and a great drummer, Bill Bowker. And we came to New York. It was supposed to be a gig for 2 weeks, which turned out to be indefinite. And it was up on 97th Street in Columbus called Russ Brown's. And we played there 6 nights a week. And we were staying at my friend Clifford Carter's parents' house in the basement. And going into New York every day from Westchester. So that's how I came to New York. And I was playing with her for about a month, 2 months in New York, and got a call to go out with the Pointer Sisters, with Clifford and the drummer. So we went out to play with them. But at that club, Russ Brown's, it was a jazz club or jazz funk club. Around the corner was a club that I know you've heard of called McKell's.
Yeah, man.
Where the group Stuff was playing and many great groups. So they were right around the corner. So when I came to New York, we would play, and a lot of people came to Russ Brown, the club we were playing at, to hear Phyllis, because word was out that there was a singer in town who was really good. And we'd come from Miami, so we weren't doing the usual New York funk scene. We're an eclectic band. We did songs from Return to Forever, Chick Corea, and we did a lot cover songs, R&B cover songs. But people would come in like Stevie Wonder, David Sanborn, George Harrison.
Nice. Wow.
I got to hang out with George Harrison. I sat down, I walked up and sat down, asked if I could sit down, and I talked with George. I was a lot of nerve, I guess, to do that. He was very nice to me. And, you know, he actually said to me, we have to play sometime. But I was so in awe that I didn't know how to reach him or anything. And I you know, but
you couldn't text him your phone number back then.
Probably being polite to me, you know.
Right.
Anyway, but the point was that we met a lot of people, and word got out, and actually Hiram through that joined the David Sanborn band. And I think a lot of other people, maybe the Brecker brothers might have come in. I know Will Lee came in, who I knew from Miami because his father was the dean of music, and Will Lee went to the University of Miami when I was there.
Yep.
So anyway, that started it. That was sort of the germ that started in New York. And I stayed in New York. And I remember the gig with the Pointer Sisters ended. I didn't know what was going to happen after that, but I didn't want to move back to Florida. So I said, well, I'm here. I want to study. So I started taking lessons with Dave Holland, the great bassist.
Wow. Cool.
On acoustic bass.
Sure.
And, you know, I was always a big fan of his playing with Miles Davis and everyone that he's played with. So I had a little bit of money saved from working so much down in Miami, not that much, enough to last maybe 6 months or so. I then got a call to play with Deodato. People know him, pianist, great Brazilian composer. Mm-hmm. He wrote 2001 funky version of that.
Okay.
Actually, the great bassist Jeff Berlin recommended me for that. And because I'd played with the Pointer Sisters, he said, he recommended me, and Deodato called me one day and said, Mark, I hear you just got off the road with the Pointer Sisters. Do you want to go to Australia for a month. So he had never heard me play. So I said, sure. I didn't even ask how much money. I just, it was,
can't pass up that opportunity.
Well, it was never the point for me of it. It was just to play. I wanted to play creative music. That was always been my desire and my goal. It still is. So I went with him to Australia, and I came back, and then we went and did a month in Mexico. It was this month tour. It's really interesting. And it was when I came back after that, Hiram Bullock recommended me to join the David Sanborn group, Sanborn band.
Yeah.
Because Herb Busher had left that group. And so I joined that group, and I was in the Sanborn band, and we were
doing some really funky stuff back then, you know?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I was on the New York funk session scene.
Yeah.
A jazz scene as well. And so I was playing with that band. We recorded a record. I actually wrote a song called Heart Lake that was on that record, one of the first compositions that I wrote. So it was a big deal for me playing with the great David Sanborn, and Hiram Bullock and Victor Lewis. And we were playing gigs around the States and in New York. And at the same time, Pat Metheny called me because he had been playing with Gary Burton, and he wanted to start his own band. And we had played in Miami a lot together.
Right.
So he called me and asked me and Danny and Lyle Mays if I wanted to join. And it was a big decision for me because I was already in the David Sanborn band and getting established in New York as a session player, doing a lot of work. And, by being in David Sanborn's band, it really brought you to the attention of a lot of the New York contractors and just players and producers in New York. And I wasn't sure, because you have to remember at that time, Pat Metheny had done a record called Bright Size Life.
Right.
He'd also done Watercolors on ECM. He'd gotten a lot of notoriety from playing with Gary Burton, but he was by no means a household name, not say house, but in the jazz world, he was well known. But it was an unknown thing, to go out and start a band and, get $50 a night or whatever. But he said, well, I was on the fence about it with Pat. I said, Pat, I'm doing this with David Sanborn. I'm not sure what I want to do. So he said, well, why don't you come up and we'll rehearse and just go play some songs and see what you feel. So I remember taking the train from New York up to Boston. I had one of those little practice headphone boxes with headphones, and I was practicing in the train all the way up. And
cool.
We played, and I just said, I have to do this. This is amazing. And we played a few of the songs. I think it was from Bright Size Life and from Watercolors. And that was it for me. I just said, I have to do this, because I saw that this was what I always wanted to do. It's been a very highly creative, original band, and not that David Sanborn band wasn't, but it was a whole different thing. I was very much into listening to the music of ECM, and which is a record company from Germany that had done Keith Jarrett records and DeJohnette, and for people who don't know ECM, but I wanted to be a part of that. So
that vision, you just wanted to be a part of it. Yeah.
Well, that music, I wanted to be playing innovative and new music. And so I took the plunge, and I had to do it. So
cool, man. And we will get to that first album, the self-titled Pat Metheny Group album, and American Garage, which followed. But first, Mark, I just want to take another minute to thank more of this episode's sponsors. So they include Mac Avenue Records. This label has been showing us the road to great music for 20 years now. 2 albums by some very fine pianists on the horizon. One is Iron Starlet by the great Connie Hahn. That's coming out June 12th. It's really good. And the other is Be Water by keyboardist Christian Sands, who can do pretty much everything on the keyboard. That is coming out July 17th. Not to mention they have an amazing Errol Garner reissue series that they're currently going through right now, called the Octave Remastered series, and an all-star tribute to Oscar Peterson called To Oscar with Love. I've seen the 5 LP deluxe edition, and it is amazing. You can learn all about these incredible releases at macavenue.com. Another big thanks to Smoke Sessions Records, really one of the great straight ahead jazz labels out there right now. They have a new album out right now by saxophonist Wayne Escoffrey called The Humble Warrior. It is truly fantastic. Randy Brecker is on it. David Gilmour is on it. Ralph Peterson, drummer, is on it. It's a really smoking record. I've been spinning it a lot. They also have a concert recording by the late great pianist Harold Mayburn, a musician who we lost in 2019. They recorded this album of Harold playing all of his own compositions, and it's really a touching set. It is called Mayburn Plays Mayburn, and it is out right now. You can check it out at smokesessionsrecords.com. All right, Mark. Hey, man, we're just getting to the start of the Pat Metheny group. You know, you're working on this first album, the self-titled, the White Album. You know, it's kind of up there with the in jazz lore as with like the Beatles' White Album. And again, my question was about the composition of this album, or the collaborative nature, because you mentioned, you know, Pat had this vision, you know, of how the music wanted to sound. And you know, I know Lyle Mays, the keyboardist, was instrumental in, you know, composing these tunes. But I'm wondering how the tunes for that first album came together, and how much involvement, you know, you or Danny Gottlieb may have had in creating this sound.
Right. Well, as I mentioned, as we spoke about earlier, that first rehearsal was really, we had played a lot of the records from Bright Side's Life, his first record, and Watercolors. So we were playing some of those compositions as well as some new songs that Pat had written. And you have to understand that Pat has such a extreme and great focus of direction. And so what he brought into the band and for all of his records, he had a very clear picture of what he wanted as far as the direction of the composition and the form of the composition. And one very important part of the puzzle, or the picture, is Lyle Mays, and how Lyle Mays helped Pat orchestrate those, from coming up with, you know, playing synthesizer and auto harp and piano. And Lyle was a genius. You know, unfortunately, he passed away, as people know, this year, which was a great loss. And but you know, seeing Lyle and Pat work together, especially on the arranging of Pat's ideas and what Lyle would bring into the picture as far as orchestrating it. He was a master orchestrator and a master of the sound spectrum of creating the whole sound of the band. Both Pat and Lyle. Pat was experimenting with, you know, playing in stereo with digital delays, and Pat has such a unique sound and touch that he's innovated, and so many players have been influenced by him. So you had the chemistry of Pat and Lyle with the new compositions, and Danny and I brought in the sensibilities that we had. Having come from a lot of studio experience at that time, relatively speaking. I'd been playing in New York and learned about the importance of the groove. When I first started to play with the band, I was playing fretted bass. So it was a different sound, and I later got a fretless, and I'll tell you that story. And Danny is an incredible drummer. Even at the time, he had studied with Joe Morello, the great Joe Morello, who's a drummer who played with Dave Brubeck of Take Five. People know that. So Danny had tremendous facility, even at that young age, because he had studied with Joe since he was in high school. So he had amazing hands, and Danny had a special affinity towards cymbals and playing the cymbals. And I think that sound, and I think Pat liked the sound of, you know, having the sound of the rhythmic propulsion of the band come more from the cymbals rather than a heavy backbeat drum type of sound. So you had me coming from more of a backbeat point of view, even though I had played a lot of jazz and a lot of upright jazz on upright bass. So I had sensibilities of the sound and hearing people like Mingus and Dave Holland, but playing that sensibility on electric bass. So I could still swing on electric bass and get a sound, and it sort of sound like an upright, but it was electric, because the music we were playing at that time called more for electric. You have to remember Jaco was on the first Bright Side's Life, and he played electric fretless. So I was sort of filling in those shoes, which are big shoes to fill, as you can imagine.
For sure.
But your question about how did the arrangements evolve, and it's hard to say exactly what happened, because Pat would come in with one of his songs if it was a new composition, and Lyle would have parts, and we'd all trade ideas, or Pat and Lyle would trade ideas about sections and how to do that. And I would come up with grooves, and it evolved in a sort of an organic sort of way. Danny and Lyle rented a house in Boston, and we would rehearse there, and we would just play for hours and hours on songs. And Pat would say things that he liked, or Pat's always clearly the leader and the director of, the direction of the band. And we all took cues from that direction, and we pretty much went on the road immediately. We've got a van. Pat bought a van from his father, and all the equipment in the van, and there wasn't room for an upright bass in the van, so I brought my electric.
Yes, it's electric, yeah.
It actually fit the band better, I think, at the time, even though later on Pat went back to acoustic bass and electric bass. And
go ahead.
And so we hit the road. And when I say hit the road, we played every city in the United States, basically, and starting all in clubs with a few concerts. Pat had and has a great booking agency, Ted Curlin Associates, and they booked us all over. And we played what came to be 300 days a year for 4 years while I was in the band. Wow. So 300 days. So, constantly on the road.
That's how you get your 10,000 hours in. Yeah. I mean,
we got 20 or 30,000.
Exactly. I mean, the chemistry was so incredibly tight, and sonically, it was so unlike anything anybody was hearing at the moment. And you're right. I'm thinking of a tune like Phase Dance, where you're doubled, right? I mean, Lyle has the electric piano and the acoustic, and ditto for Pat. It sounded like there were 700 guys up there, and your bass playing really roots the tune. It's punchy. The fact that it's electric. Ditto for a tune like Lone Jack, where it's just that's such a great groove. So that was a tune where as it evolved, it's not like Pat was saying, "Here's a bass line I wrote for you." The tune's taking shape, and you're just going doom 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 doom.
Right. That Lone Jack is a song. That song, it was basically a samba, Brazilian samba type of feel. And, Pat was very open about bringing whatever to the table with it. And if he liked it, he would like it. If he didn't like it, he said, why don't you try something else? But with that one, there was a lot of influence from Stanley Clarke on that. If you really listen to the way that I play, because it goes pretty fast, but it intermingled with a lot of influence from Jaco as well, with these 16-note phrases.
Totally.
But that comes from playing Brazilian music and listening to those people. So we played on the road for about a year before we went into the studio in Norway to record the first White album on ECM. Okay. And so those arrangements were evolving on the road as we went. And, we recorded just with a Walkman or whatever. And we're always checking it out. It was a very conscientious group, usually after gigs every night, we'd get together and Pat would have a meeting and we'd discuss, we like this, we don't like that, or what do you guys think? Should we do that? So it was, always aware of how the arrangements were working, how they were developing. And another thing that a lot of people don't pick up on or don't realize or don't make use of are the use of dynamics. And that was a really big thing with the Pat Metheny group, where we'd go from, double forte, very loud, right down to piano. And it's, it's all over classical music, and it's a natural thing because, you don't play monophonic, whatever, in one monotone. But that group was highly, highly aware of using dynamics in a way to really propel and make people listen and stop, because if you're listening to something and it's burning and all of a sudden it comes down to nothing, it's
you pay
startling,
attention.
You pay attention. So it's it's a technique or something that all musicians should be more aware of. And hello again. And one thing, another person that I found a good explanation of that was by playing with Paul Bley, the great piano player. And Paul Bley once said to us, I was playing with Danny Gottlieb, Ross Trout, and he said, you know, you really have to find the softest that you can play and the loudest, and be aware in a greater spectrum of what that is, and play through that. You know, if you know, it's very difficult, as most musicians know, to play soft and really groove and to really have the same intensity at a very low volume. It's a good thing to practice, and it's a very difficult thing to do. So to just be aware of those dynamics, and that was Paul Bley that really gave that example of it, that I thought was very interesting to make me think about, you know, really what is soft and what is loud, and working around it all the time.
And I know Pat was a huge fan of Paul Bley's playing.
Yes, he played with Paul. Yes,
totally. You know, and you really hit your stride again with the follow-up album, American Garage. And I know, you know, even Pat, he looks back at that album, Airstream, tunes like that, the epic, you know, as really a great period for you. That's kind of when Lyle Mays too really stepped up compositionally. Did you stay in touch with Lyle at all after you know, he kind of left the music scene for a bit? Or
yes, I did. Not so much for a while, but in and out every couple of years I'd be in touch. And as I said, I was just so heartbroken when he passed away. You know, it's such a great loss. But we didn't play after that, after I left the band, but we did, we kept in touch.
Oh, good.
From a distance.
He you know, was always, you know, interested in technology, and what he did with that, what was it, the Oberheim synthesizer in the group, really pioneered some new sounds, you know, with that synthesizer. And now there's the Lyle Mays sound that, you know, a lot of synthesizer players go for. He went into technology, didn't he, after
he did. I think he was programming software for music software, I think, and might have been doing other, I'm not exactly sure, but he was, as I said, Lyle was really a genius, you know, and I use that term not very freely, but he was always, his mind was always searching for things, and he always was extremely active. I remember one time, for example, we were playing at Avery Fisher Hall. We were opening up for Jaco. Jaco's playing solo. It was Avery Fisher Hall with Don Elias, and who else was playing with Jaco? I forget. And I remember right before we were getting on to play, and we were on the side by the curtains, and I saw Lyle. I said, Lyle, I think we're going to go on soon. It's sold out, Avery Fisher Hall. And I looked, I said, Lyle, what are you doing? And he had graph paper, and he was drawing a layout of a house. He was doing architecture, you know. He was that type of person, I think.
Architecture as a hobby.
Yeah, I think he designed a house for his sister, I think. I'm not sure the details of that, but you know, he was incredible. But you know, I want to back up a little, because and before, about halfway during the year before we recorded the first record of the Pat Metheny group, I started playing fretless bass.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And
that changed the whole sound of the band, and it wouldn't have been the same, those recordings, without that. And the way that it happened was, Pat had a 1958 precision bass that he had found in a barn in Kansas City. It's a friend of his.
He would, yeah.
Yes, and he had it, and he had Jaco take the frets out of it because he wanted to make it fretless. He had Jaco's technician down in Florida do it. And so Pat said, you know, Mark, why don't you try the bass that I'm having Jaco fix and make a fretless? And I said, great. And we were in the middle of a 1 week engagement at the Jazz Workshop, which was in Boston. It was a great club in Boston. All the national acts played there. And in the middle of this, I went to Logan Airport, and it came into shipping. It was in a green case that I had sent down to Jaco, and I picked it up in between breaks or before we played that night, and I got it, and there was a little note, and I wish I had this note, because it was a note from Jaco. It said, hey, Mark, here's the fretless, enjoy, you know.
Cool.
So,
wow.
And it was nice that he said, enjoy it, you know. And so anyway, I played it that night. in the back room, I warmed up a little bit, and it's kind of a big deal to go right into playing it and play the same parts that I've been playing on fretted bass and to play in tune. But I managed to get through it, and it just opened the band up. It was a different sound. It just lent itself
totally
to the just more of a fuller sound, more sustained, for all the sounds. It fit, of course, all the songs that we were doing from Bright Side's Life, which Jaco had played on.
Right.
So that was beginning of the fretless. So we, to get back to the evolution of before we played that or recorded that record, we had been playing every night basically for a year. So by the time we got to Norway, to Talent Studios, we just went in basically and played our set, and
okay.
For Manfred Eicher, it wasn't like we layered a lot of things. What you would hear on that record are first or second takes, and if there were any overdubs, it was Lyle overdubbing the synthesizer, because we couldn't do it live there. But so it was we just went in as a force and just recorded that, and which it's not that big of a thing, but I think it was for Manfred Eicher at the time, because he was more used to sort of dissecting things and being more orchestral and having more of a part of the overall development of it. But we were so self-contained at that point. I think what Manfred did bring to the table or to the group was the incredible, beautiful sound of the recording and his suggestions to open certain things up, like the intro to what's it called? Can't think of the name of the song, but it'll come to me.
Off the first album?
First album.
San Lorenzo, Face Dance, Jaco, April Wind, April Joy, Lone Jack.
Okay.
April
Joy. Cool. It was April Wind. I couldn't think of it. That was the
April
thing
on that. Yeah.
That Pat came up with, and Pat wrote that melody to April Wind on the front of it, and I doubled it. So anyway, that's sort of how the bass on my part, the fretless sound, came into that group. Yep.
No, and it's such a nice foil for Pat's sound. Mark, we've been talking for an hour. I don't know where the time went.
Wow.
And there's a whole other half of your. I want to talk about Elements.
Yes.
I want to talk about your other stuff. We may have to bring you back. And we may be able to talk about Elements here at the end. But I wanted to also invite some readers to chime in with their questions. I know they've been asking away on Facebook and YouTube. Jeff, are there any questions to pull up on screen? Here's a good one from Anthony. Thanks for submitting. Anthony, can you explain why University of Miami, became significant for music in the 1960s? Good question, Anthony. Appreciate it, man.
That's a good question. And as I said earlier, at the University of Miami, the head of the jazz department was Jerry Coker, who was a fountainhead and a widely respected jazz educator. And he attracted great players from, young aspiring players. And that's why it was such a melting pot, because it was such a good music program. And I think that's the essence of it. And I think that the players that came there, you had Pat Metheny, as I mentioned, Mark Colby, Bill Bowker, Clifford Carter, Hiram Bullock, Steve Morse, the Dixie Dregs. People that came after me, there are many players that came after me that I don't even know I can't remember their names. Rick Marquezza. You probably know some of the players, Brian.
I know some of those cats. Yeah, Anthony is also asking about Phyllis Hyman.
Yes.
He wants a little more details about the Phyllis Hyman connection.
Yes.
Did you play together?
Yes. Phyllis Hyman had a group in Florida, and actually I played with Phyllis with another group called the Hondo Beat, and they were looking for a drummer and a bass player, and Bill Bowker, the drummer who I came to New York with, joined the band with Phyllis, where she was part of another band. She wanted to form her own band, and I joined her with that, and we brought Hiram Bullock into that. And cool. So it was called Phyllis Hyman and the PH Factor for Phyllis Hyman. So we played steadily all over Florida for 2 years. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, we got this gig in New York to play for 2 weeks at this club called Russ Brown's, and the rest is sort of, I don't know if it's history, but the rest is documented from there. So cool, Phyllis was incredible singer and musician, very inspiring.
Well, Mark, as I mentioned, man, you've had an incredible solo career. You've played with everybody, Sting, so many incredible people. I want to talk a little bit. We'll wrap up maybe talking about Elements, your group,
Yes.
with Danny Gottlieb.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the Pat Metheny group and your time there, both your time there, you and Danny, had a lasting impact on your career. But I'm just curious how Elements enabled you to evolve and what you were able to do in Elements that maybe felt like you couldn't do in the Pat Metheny group. And I know that's a big question. So,
well, Danny and I, as a unit, and I think every bass player and drummer that play together for a long time, you establish a brotherhood, a rapport, and we had that. We had a special thing as a rhythm section, and we stayed in touch. Danny was still playing with the Pat Metheny group. I had gone on to play in the studio scene in New York. This is 1982. And we talked about, let's do a project. And we had some sketches and some songs that I'd written. And we decided to go in the studio. And we had some studio time at a Howard Schwartz recording. And we did the first record. And we wanted to do augment Danny and myself with Clifford Carter, who we'd been playing a lot with as a keyboard player, and Hiram Bullock. We played with Hiram Bullock, but also with saxophone player Bill Evans. So it was a quartet. Right. And that was the core of the group. And I love writing for a quartet. I love writing for saxophone. And that was how that started. There's also some duo playing on that with Danny and I. And it was a chance to experiment and do something that was our own. And we went on to record 6 records with that, some on Antilles Records, some on RCA. And I have to mention that Danny and I have a new record that's coming out, and it's Perfect. A duo record. We finally just said, nice. let's just do a duo. We want to just sort of document our legacy as just playing drums and bass. So we did a record at my studio, and it was going to be released this June of 2020. But in light of the crisis that's happening, I wanted to wait till things came back to somewhat new normal, and when people would be more, in some ways, maybe it would be better to do it now because everyone's so focused on this. But we decided to wait on it. But it's just drums and bass. We went into the studio, Very cool. Did a lot of improvising, and put it together. I later then produced it and put some overdub basses on it. But it's basically bass and drums. And we recorded one of my songs that had been written, and the rest is very experimental. But it's a good documentation, and it's called Mark Egan, Danny Gottlieb, Electric Blue. And
cool,
it'll be on my website, markegan.com. Not to plug it.
Plug away, man.
Yeah, no, it'll be
I'm
at
sure
iTunes.
A lot of people are excited about it. It'll cool.
Be at iTunes and all over the place, CD Baby. So look for that in the fall, hopefully when things come back to a new normal. And
we'll all be looking forward to it, man, because your solo stuff, your leader stuff, I'm thinking Mosaic. It's so cool what you do with those overdub basses. It's so folks definitely going to want to check this one out. Markegan.com is a good place to do it. Man, we can also talk a bit while you're at it about waveform, wave one,
wave tone.
Yes. I got my notes up here, and these are glasses from 2 years ago. I stepped on my other glasses, broke my prescription, so now's not the time to go see an eye doctor. Obviously, I'm squinting at my notes. But yes,
if I'm squinting too, it's because I don't have my reading glasses on, because of the reflection of the computer, you wouldn't be able to see my eyes. So anyway, the term wave tone, it sort of was floating around. I think Manolo Badrina, the great percussionist, he used that term a lot, like wave tone, Mark, wave tone. And then I know Adam Nussbaum used to use that term as well. So in any event, I wanted to start a record label. This is in 1993. And I started, it's called Wavetone Records. And the first record was a live recording that Danny and I did from an Elements live recording in Japan.
Far East.
And
it's awesome. Great energy on that album.
We have Far East, Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3. And that was a way that I could start it on a low budget because it was already recorded. We didn't have to pay for the masters for it. And that was in CD form, and that started it out. And since then, I have 25 releases on the label. They're all at markegan.com. You can see them there. And it was something I always wanted to do because I'd been with many major labels, and finally I was at a point where there were a lot of projects that I wanted to get to see the light of day as being released, and I couldn't get them on labels. So I said, I'm just going to do this and experiment with it. So it's been a great outlet. I started out with world distribution, and now, of course, with the internet, I have world distribution. And this new record will be on there, Electric Blue, as well. So it's been a great opportunity, and I was able to record with great guitar player Jeff Champa. He has a record on it as well as other artists that I've produced. Also, the great late Joe Beck, who is someone I didn't get to talk about, but is one of my all-time favorite guitarists. People should check out Joe Beck.
Hey, man, another episode. We'll have you back on.
Yeah, Joe was a heavyweight. All the people that you've had on know Joe Beck and play with him. And so that's a little bit of Wavetone Records. And, it's continuing on. It's self-fulfilling. It's a vanity label. And then it's all productions that I do. But it's a great outlet. And the great thing about this, I know I don't want to go on too long because I know we got to wrap up, but this new record, which is called Electric Blue, with Danny, just drums and bass, is going to be released as vinyl as well. It's my first time getting back into vinyl. So It was very interesting for me producing that. And there'll be several volumes of it because you can't fit all of it onto a record, yeah?
Right. Cool, man.
It's a shorter format. So it was fun. I had to learn about it. Actually, today I'm going to listen to the test pressings.
Sweet. They drop a real needle on it. Yeah.
It's a big deal now with the coronavirus crisis because we get a delivery and we're at the window. I feel like I'm a puppy dog, I'm waving at
a person, a real person,
person. So I have to listen to the test pressings, which they usually send 5 test pressings. I have to listen to all of them and see if it skips in the same place or whatever. So that's exciting. And I'm going to do more in vinyl. So that's what's happening with Wave.
Well, we are certainly looking forward to that. It's a nice little light at the end of the tunnel for us jazz fans, a new Mark Egan, Danny Gottlieb record. Mark, man, this was so much fun. I love talking to you. You made this South Florida boy very proud talking to you. It was nice, hearing about the scene down here. Incredible. Thank you so much for joining me for Brunch. Again, folks, follow along markegan.com. I will see you backstage, man. In the meantime, I'm going to say bye-bye to everyone listening.
Thank you.
So long, Mark.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Wow. Mark Egan, man, we're going to have him on for another episode because those stories were just incredible. Pat Metheny, Lyle Mays, Jaco, Bill Evans, the great sax player from Miles Davis's group. Wow. Let us know in the comments whether you want to hear from Mark again. In the meantime, we've got a great rest of the week planned out for you. Tomorrow we have a young bass player named Petros Klampanis on the show. He's doing some really innovative stuff with the bass. I guess I don't know, we're sticking with the bass for tomorrow, and then we're going to wrap things up on Friday with the great Jeff Coffin of formerly of the Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. He's a great multi-instrumentalist, and he was just on a new record with Dave Liebman that was a celebration of Miles Davis's funk period. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, we have a great offer going on right now. It's an exclusive to this time period. You can enroll for 3 months of unlimited digital access to jazziz.com. So, all of our back issues, all of our podcasts, web reviews, features, all that stuff for just 99 cents per month. Plus, we will enroll you to receive our upcoming summer 2020 print issue, which is all about fusion. So there's Jeff. He's pulling up our website right now. If you go to jazziz.com, click subscribe, you'll be taken to all our trial offers. And again, right now, try 3 months for just 99 cents per month. That's digital all access plus a print issue. And summer 2020 is a doozy. It is all about jazz fusion. We've got a wide-ranging interview with Chick Corea. That's our feature story. Also, independent artists, right now, you're at home, you're shedding, you're practicing, you're wondering what to do with that album that you recorded. Best thing to do, submit it to Inside Track on Jazziz.com. This is a program we offer to independent artists. People are always wondering, how can I get my album reviewed? This is the way to do it. Submit it via Inside Track. You enter all the album's information, the band name. You can send us a SoundCloud link, a Bandcamp link, Google Drive link, whatever. You upload the album cover. It all comes directly to me. It comes directly to Matt McCucci, our online editor, and every other Jazziz editor. We get it. We listen to it, and you never know. It could end up in a print magazine. It could end up in a weekly playlist. It could end up as a song of the day. A lot of opportunities available. Check that out, jazziz.com/inside track, or click submit your music in the top navigation bar. All right, everyone, that'll do it for me. I've finished my coffee. I'm going to go listen to some Pat Metheny group. I don't know about you, and I will see you back here tomorrow for another episode of the Jazziz Daily Brunch.